The year is 2002, and the Charlotte Hornets have just relocated to New Orleans to become the New Orleans Hornets, and fans are absolutely devastated, as it seemed like all hope was lost. These fans had seen guys like Larry Johnson, Glenn Rice, and Alonzo Mourning compete throughout the 1990s, but just 1 year later, in 2003, hope was restored when the NBA announced that a new expansion franchise named the Charlotte Bobcats would be joining the Eastern Conference in 2004 for the 04-05 season. By expansion draft rules, each team could protect 8 players from the expansion draft, so the Bobcats were given a pretty crappy roster to begin their franchise with. Highlighted by future Golden State Warriors star Zaza Pachulia, who would not even end up playing a game for the Bobcats as he would be traded, Sacramento Kings forward Gerald Wallace, and then a bunch of guys I'd be willing to bet you've never even heard of. Thankfully, the Bobcats were given the 4th pick, but they weren't done there, as Bobcats GM and head coach Bernie Bickerstaff traded the 4th and 33rd pick for the 2nd pick so they could select UConn star big man Emeka Okafor. So the roster is set, the season is set, and, well, the Bobcats' first season went about as expected, going 18-64, which was tied for the 3rd worst record in the league and 2nd to last in the East. But luckily, Emeka Okafor averaged 15 points a game and took home Rookie of the Year honors over Dwight Howard, so he was looking like he was going to be a really good player. In the 2005 draft, the Bobcats had 2 picks, the 5th and the 13th, and they used these 2 picks to take the North Carolina duo of Raymond Felton and Sean May, who were coming hot off a national championship. In the 05-06 season, the Bobcats improved a little, going 26-56. Gerald Wallace emerged as the leading scorer, averaging 15 points a game. Emeka Okafor played well again, and Raymond Felton showed flashes of being a floor general for years to come. The Bobcats still didn't make the playoffs, and they finished 3rd worst in the Eastern Conference. They were given the 3rd pick in a super weak 2006 draft class, and unfortunately for them, luck just wasn't on their side, as they were just 1 pick away from being able to take the best player from this class, LaMarcus Aldridge, but instead, Charlotte ended up with Gonzaga's Adam Morrison, who was seen as a questionable pick back then, and now we all know Morrison is a huge bust. He does have 2 rings though. 2006 is a critical year, as it's the year that Michael Jordan became a minority owner of the team. In the 06-07 season, the Bobcats improved once again, and things finally started to seem like they were headed in the right direction. Finishing 33-49, finishing 11th in the East, Gerald Wallace led the way in scoring once again, averaging 18 points a game. Raymond Felton, Sean May, and Emeka Okafor all improved, and even Adam Morrison didn't play that bad per se in his rookie season. But Bobcats owner Robert Johnson had seen enough of Bernie Bickerstaff, and he was let go as head coach after 3 seasons, but he was invited to stay with the organization. The Bobcats hired Sam Vincent to be the head coach and Rod Higgins to become the GM. And in the 2007 draft, the Bobcats selected North Carolina big Brendan Wright with the 8th pick, 1 pick before Joakim Noah, and 3 picks before Thaddeus Young. However, just days later, Wright would be traded to the Golden State Warriors to acquire Jason Richardson, who at this point was still seen as one of the better shooting guards in the league. This was a good acquisition. Even though he was only in Charlotte for 2 seasons, Richardson was a much better player than Brendan Wright. Wright was a terrible NBA player who's known as a bust. The Bobcats also chose to re-sign Gerald Wallace. In the 2007-2008 season, the Bobcats finished 32-50, 1 game worse than the year prior. Jason Richardson led the way in scoring with 21 points a game, followed by Gerald Wallace with 18 and Raymond Felton with 14. This was not good enough for Sam Vincent to keep his job, and the Bobcats would end up hiring legendary coach Larry Brown, who is most known for his time with the Detroit Pistons, helping them win the 2004 NBA championship. And the hope was that he could instill the same winning culture in Charlotte. It started in the draft as the Bobcats selected Texas guard DJ Augustine. Augustine is a solid player, solid veteran, but the Bobcats passed on Brooke Lopez, Roy Hibbert, Serge Ibaka, and NBA legend JaVale McGee. In the 2008-2009 season, the Bobcats had their best season yet, going 35-47. Larry Brown was looking like he could actually bring some improvement, and the potential was there. In the 2009 draft, the Bobcats selected Duke's Gerald Henderson with the 12th pick. Fun fact, Gerald Henderson was one of my favorite players as a kid, which is like so random. He was that random guy I'd give you 40 with in 2K. In free agency, the Bobcats decided to trade Emeka Okafor, the team's first ever draft pick, to the New Orleans Hornets in exchange for Tyson Chandler, who was seen as one of the best shot blockers of his era. In the 2009-2010 season, the Bobcats first traded for star guard Steven Jackson, and he would lead the way with 21 points a game, but more importantly, Charlotte did the unthinkable. They made the NBA playoffs as the 7th seed, going 44-38. Unfortunately, the Bobcats would get swept by the Orlando Magic, but guess what? The future was bright in Charlotte. They made the playoffs. Way to go, Larry Brown. Surely you'll keep this up into next season, right? Right? Well, the Bobcats did not have a draft pick in 2010, but in free agency, they lost out on Raymond Felton to the Knicks, and they chose to trade Tyson Chandler to Dallas in exchange for, well, a bag of potato chips and maybe some Texas brisket. But they did end up signing Sean Livingston, who was not the Sean Livingston we know in Golden State. Oh, and Kwame Brown, who was just scrambling to stay in the league. It was in 2010 that Michael Jordan would buy a majority stake in the Bobcats to become the new owner of the team. And at the beginning of the 2010-2011 season, just 28 games, Larry Brown abruptly resigned from the team for literally no reason. I mean, like, yeah, the Bobcats started 9-19, but, like, come on, Larry. You just led the team to their first playoffs in franchise history. Fan morale is at an all-time high. But nope, Larry Brown jumped the sinking ship, and Paul Silas was named to replace him. The Bobcats would go 34-48, finishing 10th in the East. In the 2011 draft, the Bobcats chose to trade for the draft rights of Bismack Biyombo, a project prospect who was mega athletic in his pre-draft workouts. But the Bobcats really struck gold with the selection of UConn's Kemba Walker, who is coming off at an all-time high after leading the Huskies to 11 wins straight to win the national championship. This won't be the last you hear about Kemba Walker in this video. Unfortunately, the NBA was in a lockout during the 2011-2012 season, meaning only 66 games were played. But somehow, the Bobcats found a way to become the worst team in NBA history, going just 7-59, the lowest amount of wins ever in NBA history. Fans were putting bags over their heads to go to games. It was embarrassing. Fans wanted the team to just straight shut down completely, but some still had hope. Paul Silas was fired immediately and replaced with Mike Dunlap. In the 2012 draft, the Bobcats had a golden opportunity. They just had the worst season in NBA history. Surely they're going to be given the first overall pick to be able to take Anthony Davis, a generational talent who is seen as the most promising prospect since Kevin Durant in 2007. But unfortunately for the Bobcats, their luck was terrible again, and they fell to the second overall pick in the draft, and the New Orleans Hornets got the first pick, meaning they got to select Davis. With the second pick, the Bobcats still had some really good options, including Bradley Beal, Damian Lillard, Harrison Barnes, Andre Drummond, and the list goes on and on. But instead of those guys, Charlotte selected Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Anthony Davis's two-man at Kentucky. Gilchrist was seen as a raw, unpolished player with a high motor, which Michael Jordan and new GM Rich Cho apparently loved. Kidd-Gilchrist is most remembered for his awful jump shot, quite possibly the worst of all time. I mean, what is this? In the 2012-2013 season, the backcourt of Kemba Walker and Gerald Henderson proved to be a really good duo. It wasn't putting wins in the record, but it wasn't these guys' fault. Leading the way in scoring with Kemba at 17 and Henderson at 15.5, the Bobcats had found their backcourt, and they finished with a record of 21-61, a huge improvement from the year prior, but still not good, and this team seemed to be in absolute shambles. The Bobcats fired Mike Dunlap after just one season and replaced him with Steve Clifford. Clifford was an assistant with the Lakers, meaning he had experience working with Dwight Howard, Steve Nash, and Kobe Bryant, and he was seen as the guy that could elevate this pretty young roster to the next level. The Bobcats had the fourth pick in the 2013 draft, taking Indiana's Cody Zeller, who was seen as about the opposite from MKG in every single way. A very developed big man who wasn't uber athletic that would be able to make an impact on day one. Now, I'm not going to blame Charlotte, but they did miss out on taking Giannis. But so did all these other teams, so I'm not going to hold them accountable for this. In free agency, Charlotte would make a huge splash, signing Utah Jazz big man Al Jefferson to a 3-year, $40 million contract. This was a huge win for the Bobcats as well as Jefferson, as he was going to be the number one option, no questions asked. The major announcement from this season came from New Orleans, when they announced that they would be rebranding to become the New Orleans Pelicans, leaving the Hornets name wide open. And in December of 2013, Michael Jordan announced that the Bobcats would rebrand back to the original Charlotte Hornets name and colors. So we've made it, the final year of the Bobcats. Oh boy, this was a great way to end the era. The Bobcats finished 43-39, good enough for 7th in the East, making the playoffs for the second time in franchise history. And the starting five of Kemba Walker, Gerald Henderson, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Cody Zeller, and Al Jefferson was a really fun one to watch. I remember watching this playoff run under a microscope, as I had just started playing basketball myself, and I loved to watch this team. However, just like the Bobcats in 2010, they would get swept in the first round, this time by LeBron James and the Miami Heat. This series was absolutely embarrassing, highlighted by a foot injury from Al Jefferson, which caused him to have problems the whole series, even missing Game 4. The Heat would go on to the finals, and the Bobcats were finished. That was it, the end of the Bobcats' run. Now we know Charlotte as the Hornets, and even though the record isn't much better, fans really try to forget the time of the Bobcats. It is not a time that is remembered fondly. I love the Hornets look. It's just such a clean, nice thing. It was a good rebrand. But it is fun to look back on the time of the Charlotte Bobcats.